Spartz is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to make a couple brief remarks on just some of the issues that were brought up from other side and then kind of get to the subject. No, honestly, I agree. Last Congress, the other side passed a lot of very bad bills. I don't think quantity of bills is a good legislation and actually wasted a lot of money. And unfortunately, you know, they had control on all houses and presidency and were able to do a lot of bad legislation and not dealing with the real issues affecting Americans, crushing debt, inflation, and the spending and, you know, and what's happening on our border is very destructive for our country. And they don't want to do, and they don't even want to find bipartisan agreement on these issues, this Congress, which is very sad for me to see. You know, I know there is a lot of discussions about, you know, January 6th, and I've been in the chamber January 6th, and I'll tell you something, you know, we call this insurrection. I'll have to tell you, if the people that show up there wanted to do it, they would have succeeded, but they didn't show up for that reason. It was people that were upset because the quality of people came there, they were mad because we are not governing for the people. And that's unfortunately what was very strange to me, that Speaker Pelosi didn't have a security. Speaker Pelosi insisted for us to stay in the chamber, where I personally demanded to leave that chamber. So a lot of things, you know, the other side dropped the ball. And it was very unfortunate for me to see that. So I think this is beyond the subject of this matter, but we need to stop, you know, accusing people that disagree with the government that have been very corrupt and oppressive, you know, to actually come here and, you know, express peacefully their dissatisfaction. And there are always some bad players, and who knows who they are, but we don't call all people insurrectionists. This is just un-American to do it, and I'm sick and tired of the other side constantly doing it, because I knew a lot of people that were there in the crowd, and they're good Americans, patriotic, that love this country. But go further, you know, I know that maybe, you know, Chairman Issa said it might be a waste of time, you know, and Hunter Biden is going to invoke the Fifth Amendment. But you know what? What he's doing right now, beyond that, it is a blatant disregard of congressional subpoena. That's how he does. He actually dares enough. No other American would show up actually in the face, you know, of Congress and defy and say, I'm going to decide how things are going to happen. This is just disrespectful. Only someone who thinks a little too much of himself would go actually do something. People might disagree, fighting in the courts, but not in the face. As Representative Bishop said, that is actually extremely disrespectful to this institution to do what he is doing. And if we look at the matter of the fact, we can debate and try, you know, to get attention to other issues and deliberate, but ultimately, I think that should be, you know, and Representative Moran said that is setting up a very bad precedent. If the other side decide, you know, that, you know, somebody can just act like that with the Congress, they might shoot themselves in the foot, because next Congress, there could be something different, and they will be on the other side, because we're setting up a precedent, but somebody's going to decide if they're going to comply or not of the deposition subpoena. And I don't think this institution, you know, should allow that happen. If, you know, this is a very serious impeachment inquiry, if Hunter Biden wants to explain what's happened, he has a chance to come. And it's not like in a deposition you have just one side. You have both sides, equal amount of time. Everything can be questioned. So it's a very bipartisan process, but not a 5-minute presentation that will just go until he do just here for 5 minutes talking points with his lawyers. And it's not going to really get to the subject matter, because subject matter at stake, it's extremely serious. I think we should start taking actually impeachment inquiries and proceedings much more seriously than the other side did. It's not a politics, it's not a joke. We're a serious institution, and I do not think people think that way here now. And it's unfortunately what we have became. We became a circus, entertainment, and talking points, and not really looking at issues seriously. It's sad for me to see, and I think this is a reflection, you know, on where we are heading as a republic, and it's a sad reality. But we have to decide, are we going to be adults in the room and start looking at the issues, or we're just going to do presentations here? So I think if we go to the narrow matter of the discussion, do we allow anyone to defy the congressional subpoena? And the other sides will have to make a decision how they're going to vote for that. But they might regret that they're doing politics right now. So I hope they will rethink this and support in this resolution. So I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff is recognized. Then
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure, but I might be actually the only member of Congress who actually immigrated as an adult, not with parents as a baby, as a child, brought by the family, but actually as an adult at the age of 21 made decision to legally immigrate to the United States from Ukraine. So I understand the contribution, of what immigrants done to this country. We're a country of immigrants, but country of legal immigration and laws. And what I want to talk to you a little bit, you mentioned about your, husband's parents coming from Ukraine. Do you believe it's happening right now, since we have illegal immigration overwhelming our system, somebody with legitimate concerns? And I hear from a lot of, including Ukrainians that coming through the program, that they're coming, there are a lot of challenges with that because there is no capacity for legal immigration, and a lot of time it's becoming perverse. If you come here legal, as you mentioned, my husband to sign off on a lot of papers that I'm not going to be burdened in society. I never took any benefits. I came for opportunities and job and hard work, not to welfare. Now we're creating a system where a lot of people come illegal and get benefits much better than you come here legally. You really kind of disincentivized, go through legal system. So do you believe, Ms. Yegorov, that what is happening right now, it actually hurts legitimate asylum seekers, legitimate people avoiding persecution and have refugees, or try to come here to contribute to society? What are your thoughts on that?
I think absolutely. The problem is that the vast majority of refugees that have been vetted by the United Nations are women and children from just 3 countries, right? Ukraine, Syria, and Afghanistan. This is not the same population that we're seeing coming through the southern border. So we're not accepting the most vulnerable refugees. Based on public data that I found in New York City, 80% of the new migrants in New York City are single adults. And if 50% of the refugees are women and children, there is a disconnect. We are not, the most vulnerable cannot even make the cross in the southern border because it's very dangerous. And so the most vulnerable will never be able to cross the border.
Yeah, and that is a challenge. And I actually just went to the border and was always, had mostly the adult males who go there. But Mr. Chan, you talk about something, processing at the border. Would you agree that we should have immediately determined, regardless how we believe in asylum standard, determination right at the border, and deny an entry to people that illegitimately applying for asylum? Would you support adjudication and denying an entry immediately at the border?
Thank you for the question. I don't think that would be practically possible to make a determination for asylum so quickly. Asylum is a very
why do you want all
process
these judges then? If they cannot adjudicate immediately, why do they want them? Just to provide more papers and wait more years? Why do you even, if you cannot do that, what's the point of you wanting to have more judges if you cannot have immediate adjudication?
So there aren't judges typically sitting at the border region to be able to...
Yeah, but you say we need to have more. So what would they be doing there? Just giving more papers? Or what would they be doing if they're not adjudicated and immediately deciding if entry would be allowed? What are they for there?
So I think we completely agree here about the importance of having an efficient and orderly process that quickly can screen people like asylum seekers for eligibility. The question is just how do you do that operationally to make it effective?
But you would not disagree that we should have immediately adjudication and making decision at the border, regardless how we feel about the standard, because HR 2 increases standard, and it's actually a reasonable standard. More likely than not, it's still 50-50 standard, so it's a pretty still high standard, considering, how many people abusing the system, and legitimate asylum seekers actually that truly can be prosecuted and killed by their government, have a hard time now because there is no prioritization. So you think that should be happening at the border and we should deny an entry?
So what I don't think would work is, I think you used the word immediately a couple of times, it takes time for an asylum seeker to understand and explain his or her case to an asylum officer.
But it's okay, maybe that will time, but they would not be allowed an entry in the United States, right? So they can stay, in the detention facilities, but ultimately they would not be given notice to appear and go in the country. Is that correct? You agree with that?
I'm not, that is the process right now, is that somebody who is seeking...
No, now they're releasing, because they don't have ability. We're so overwhelmed. But you said like cartels, if we have that, would actually be preyed upon people. But aren't they preying upon people right now? I mean, have you been at the border and see what's happening? The situation now, you believe they're not preyed upon by cartels, and it's huge. People, women and children, and we have people pretty much being abused.
I have been to the border, and people who are seeking asylum, people here waiting at the border. I was just at the Nogales port this fall. People are waiting for weeks, sleeping at those turnstiles to be able to gain entry because there aren't enough capacity.
Because
by
cartels
CBP
are
to be able
abusing
to
the
do that.
system. I
And
yield
yes,
back. My
cartels
time is
are-
expired, and using them the pawns.
If I could just expand my
At the
answer a little
request
bit.
of the minority, Ms. Ross is next.
Thank you.
Would gentleman yield to Ms. Spartz?
Yes, I yield to Ms. Spartz from Indiana.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief, but I'd really appreciate my colleagues bringing this bill. Our republic was created to protect people's rights to life, liberty, and property. But when we become in a government that becoming tyrannical, where we actually have a federal employees and federal government has oppressive techniques to oppress and suppress First Amendment rights that are so important, this is fundamentals of our country, we become very dangerous country with the government allowing to use money in a dictatorship of opinion. And unfortunately, our government has not been stepping up to protect people's rights. So this is an ability, at least for people, to challenge the government and protect their rights again for themselves against tyrannical techniques used. If we are not going to stand up for our freedoms, if we are not going to be standing up for our First Amendment rights, we're going to fail as a republic. So I think it's important to give that power for we the people. And I appreciate my colleagues standing up, and I hope that will be not a partisan issue, because it shouldn't be. It should be bipartisan issue to support First Amendment rights of the American citizens and go against tyranny of the government that we see more and more. So I appreciate it, and I urge my colleagues to support this bill. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back.
back to-
Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just thank you, Special Counsel, for being here in these challenging times. And I want to tell you a few things that is interesting for me. You obviously could see that there is a motive, there is a legacy. You obviously see that it was a willful retention of these documents, but it's interesting for me that when you talk about sympathetic, well-meaning older man with poor, elderly man with a poor memory, it seems like every attorney would advise you to be sympathetic and be well-meaning, and it seems like the whole FBI needs to do, based on my hearings here, I need to do check on amnesia because everyone says doesn't recall. So it seems to me that it might have been something way more in his recollection. There's a typical I don't recall, because that's what everything's like. That's I've learned it here. So is there something more than that, that just I don't recall something for you to actually decide? Because it seems that this is the core of the whole investigation. Why didn't you pursue further the charges?
Congresswoman, my judgment as to how a jury would likely perceive and receive and consider evidence relating to all the evidence that would be put in by both the government and the defense at trial, it was based on a number of different sources, from documents, including various recordings, some of them from the 2016-2017 timeframe, some from our interview with the president in October of 2023. I think what you're asking about specifically is how the president presented himself during his interview in October of last year. And of course, I did take into account not just the words from the cold record of the transcript, but the entire manner in living color, in real time, of how the president presented himself during his interview.
Hopefully he didn't outsmart you and all of us. But before I yield, I just wanted to actually just comment on something, Mr. Raskin mentioned about, us not remembering communists. I actually grew up under communists, and I have a very good recollection what it is. And unfortunately, Terrence on the rise, on the march, which he said, unfortunately, they've been emboldened by, President Obama, now by President Biden too. And unfortunately, our government and Department of Justice is really now resembles, a tyrannical government. It's sad for me to see that, but I'm going, and with a really double standard what we have there. But
Thank you, Ranking Member Correa. Now recognize Ms. Spartz from Indiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I definitely can tell that we have a significant difference of opinion what the government was created for. From my perspective, government wasn't created. Only socialist governments are created to provide for the prosperity and promises that it can never fulfill. It always runs out of money. Unfortunately, our government did too. But our government was created under Constitution to protect rights to life, liberty, and property. And unfortunately, administrative state became very, very oppressive. And unless you are very politically connected or wealthy, you have no ability to survive in the current environment. And it's getting to the point that the little guy is getting destroyed. And you have no ability. Don't tell me that any normal person has an ability to have an influence on executive branch and president to replace these judges unless you can give a couple $1 million to campaign of a president. You are screwed. And this is the reality what we have. So I think we have to really start thinking about how we're going to resolve that. And that's my question for the witnesses. We know that we're in trouble. And, you know, and I think Chevron doctrine discussion, it's a very serious discussion. I'm glad it's happening, and hopefully the Supreme Court will start doing some things to restore some imbalances. But what other things we need to do? Maybe Professor Mascott, you can tell how we gotten here and what are we going to do, because this is not a good situation.
Well, thank you for the question, Congresswoman. I think, particularly since we're here today talking about agency adjudication, I think for starters to look at some of the recent statutory changes in the explosion of agency power to bring enforcement actions within its own tribunal. One thing that often gets lost in the discussion, and you're raising some important points in your remarks, is how recently we have expanded internal agency tribunals. It wasn't until 1990, for example, that the SEC was able to bring and impose a lot of civil monetary penalties and important proceedings in-house, and then it was a few years after that that those penalties and those internal proceedings were applied to parties outside of registered entities. The Dodd-Frank Act in particular really explosively expanded agency power to bring enforcement actions in its own tribunal, and it's unclear really why that's necessary. One of the stated reasons tends to be efficiency, but we know from litigation that a lot of the other witnesses have been involved in here that agency procedures themselves often take years to wind through the process. So I think as an initial matter, this committee and Congress could go back and re-examine whether agencies should be imposing sanctions, lifetime bans, and penalties at all in their own tribunals, or whether they should go into the court system. And if you are going to preserve agency adjudicative authority, perhaps require transparency. Agencies maybe should have to publish the factors that they use when they decide how they're going to engage in these proceedings. But they really should be much more restrained, subject to the accountability of constitutional rights. And
I don't think accountability is going to happen within agencies. I'm sorry to tell you. This is it sounds all good on paper, but it has to happen somehow in a different way. Mr. Alt, you have some ideas?
Well, ultimately, I think when you have these core issues, when you have, the sorts of penalties that we see the SEC meting out, where you permanently bar individuals from practicing their profession, where you see draconian penalties, these are questions I think properly should be decided by Article III courts. I think, quite frankly, there's no substitute for that, and I think Congress could go ahead and make that requirement.
So we can start suing our agencies, correct? That's the only way to sue agencies for unreasonable decisions, or what are we going to do?
Well, it at least...
Allow people to do that, or what are we going to do?
Well, in terms of that at least...
What is the recourse? What is it, if you're a normal American, what is your recourse? If you have unreasonable fines that happening, what is it going to do? And unreasonable decisions, what are you going to do? Would you have, Mr. Chernovets, you have some suggestion? What do you do as a normal person that, goes through this process, that there is no transparency and they can do whatever they want? You have no ability to influence. There is no trial. There is no jury. The process is so insider-driven, and you have no ability. Unless you're well-connected, you're in trouble.
Even if you're well-connected and wealthy, you don't have a chance. Folks in front of the SEC settle their cases 98% of the time. It's not because 98% of the people the SEC goes after are guilty. It's because they can't afford to fight all the way through the process for years and years and years and years on end. The agency beats them down into submission and finally puts a settlement offer on the table that they can't afford not to take because they're out of money and they're out of, they want to get back to practicing their career, and they're just not able to continue to fight for their innocence. So I think as long as these administrative adjudication apparatus are in place, that there isn't a lot of hope for people who find themselves arrayed against the federal government in these enforcement actions. You need the independent federal judiciary as the intermediary between the individual citizen and the state.
Thank you. My time is expired. I guess we need to be better lobby for the people, we as the Congress. Thank you.
To vote against it. Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Ivey, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To my colleague from Wyoming, I say I'm not questioning your sincerity. We just may disagree on some things here. I did want to comment on a few things, though. The video that you showed, I don't know field hockey, but I do know basketball. And you showed a video of I guess someone getting hurt in the competition on a rebound. I do want to point out to the gentlelady and to my colleagues that in women's basketball, especially at the collegiate level, and the University of Maryland's in my district, by the way, Go Terps, Final Four, on multiple occasions, national champions. They use men in practice all the time. I mean, it's a fairly routine practice for that to happen. And I think there are high school girls teams that do that too. One school that's also in my district, Bishop McNamara, perennial top 10 in the nation, girls basketball teams. In fact, they have kids from that team that have gone that are playing in the WNBA, just like the University of Maryland does too. So I don't think it's automatically dangerous that there's some sort of competition. I take your point that you're trying to protect women, but I gotta say this, the women athletes in my district at least aren't asking for your protection. In fact, I think generally speaking, they kind of resent it because they want to compete. If you look at someone like Caitlin Clark, it's a little ironic we're doing this debate on the eve of the start of the women's national tournament at the NCAA level. They always recoil when they're sort of segregated off with respect to comparison. She didn't want to say that she's only the highest scorer in the history of women's basketball.
Will the gentleman yield?
Not at this point, but I'll come back to you in a minute. But that she was the highest scorer of all time. She took great pleasure in beating out Pete Maravich for the national scoring champion of all time. So from my perspective, and I'm about 1 million people in my district. There's about 136,000 school kids. Many of them are playing sports at the high school level and the middle school level too. AAU competition and college, as I mentioned. I'm not aware of any transgender kids trying to compete in any of those sports. I reached out to my school system. They said they didn't know of any. So from my perspective, this is legislation in search of a problem. It's a problem that doesn't exist in my county. I haven't really seen it at our state level in Maryland. I'm not seeing it in the NCAA tournament that starts this week and has been going all year, and it's been a great year. By the way, if you stop somebody on the street and say, name the top college basketball player this year, I mean, I bet most of them have heard about Caitlin Clark, but would have trouble naming a comparable male basketball player. And I think that's as it should be. By the way, too, we've got scenarios where we've got girls at the high school level or middle school level going out for the football team and making it, girls competing in wrestling, going out for the team and making it. I think that's fine. I think we should leave that so that they can do it. But then the last point I want to make, too, is just to reference back to the veto message that was delivered by the Republican governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, in reaction to this, right before he vetoed similar kind of legislation in his state. And he said something kind of similar. He's got 75,000 high school kids participating in high school sports, 4 transgender kids playing high school sports in Utah, 1 transgender student playing girls sports, 86% of trans youth reporting suicidality, 56% of trans youth having attempted suicide. So even if you care about women's sports, and even if you're trying to protect women, I'm not questioning your honesty or your position on that, but I do think we should also consider the kids on the other side of this, the kids who are seeing, the transgender kids who are seeing this debate, and not just this one, but debates across the country at state level, on TV and the like. And to them, this is a message of rejection and exclusion. It's hurtful to them. I've got 6 kids, none of them are transgender. So I don't have any personal experience with this, but I do hope that we can try and be more considerate of their concerns and their needs as well. Try and balance this out. If you're worried about women's sports, I take you at your word, although I think women's sports is doing better now in the United States than it ever has been. I think it will continue to be so. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Spartz, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'm going to strike the last word. I actually wanted to, rebut a few points you mentioned, because I actually mother of 2 girls who play on the varsity team at high school, and they do practice with my husband playing golf, but it's very different when you practice or actually having a competitive game. And let's just be honest, you say people, there is, no organizations that, organization that's supporting this. I'll be honest with you, I've been in the legislative branch for some time here in the state Senate before, and I will tell you that most of the organizations have a pretty names, and they have a lot of presentations, but a lot of them don't even stand for the people on the ground with this issue. So I actually would take any endorsements of any pretty sounded organization with a grain of salt. I've seen that people that sit on the national farm boards never been on the combine and promote actually some of these policies that are bad for real farmers, small farmers on the ground, not for large monopolies they try to protect. So there are a lot of them, there is the money and power protected in DC. So I usually have I see who fund the organization, what they're about. But you're talking about girls and women. This is just a common sense and science. Biological sex does matter. That matter. I wish it wouldn't. I would be really mean and tough, but I already am without it. As I said, with Second Amendment rights, I'm good with it, okay? But I'll tell you that this is really, disappointing for me that we worry about, and no one is trying to hurt anyone here, but why are we not worrying about hurting opportunities and really discriminating against girls and women? Why we are not worrying about this in this debate? Here's just protecting, biological girls and women and not hurting their opportunities. They work extremely hard, and I'm telling you how hard a lot of these girls work. The opportunities for college, the opportunities for advancement, job to win, and I think we should be really honest about that.
Will the gentlelady?
Yeah, I will yield to you, sure.
Okay. I'll stick with basketball because Prince George's County, and track for that matter too. Turn out Olympians that would match any other jurisdiction here. Our high school teams are turning out women going to play basketball at the college level across the country, AAU national champions and the like. They're not asking for this. They're doing just fine with the track that they're on. They're getting college scholarships. They're playing in the WNBA. They're not asking for this help because I don't think they feel that they need it.
Well, we may have different people in your district, in my district, because I have a lot of people in my district that were upset. A lot of women and school-age girls are upset they're put in this situation. So I think we need to have an honest conversation about why we would not give girls these opportunities, to protect for them opportunities to compete, because ultimately we have to be honest. That is science, if we go back to science, and that is a common sense that we're born biologically different, and that's just a reality. We can spin this reality. We can have a lot of definitions. I can't even keep up with all of these definitions. But this is a reality that we have. We are different when we are born with different physical capabilities. Not all, but we have inherent, genetical, formula when we're born. That is genetics. That is, you cannot change that in as much as we want to do that. And I think that's why, I will yield to you. Sure.
Name one transgender player who's been drafted by the WNBA.
Well, listen, it's not about, who's been drafted or not drafted, okay? We have a situation, what I'm just talking to you, we have a situation where we need to really be very clear. Do we want to have biological male playing women's sport? That goes to this. Do we want to have them allowed to happen or not? Or we should maybe resolve, I'm sure there are some kids with a lot of mental health issues. And really, there are a lot of issues driven by a lot of different things. There are a lot of, but the question at us, do we believe that biological male should be played on girls' teams or women's teams?
Will the gentlelady yield?
No, please, could you answer? I will yield to you, but do you believe that biological male should be
I don't know of any who were trying to do. The question I was going to ask you was, at the NCAA level, women's basketball, are there transgender players trying to compete in that league? There may be, but I just haven't heard about it. And as far as I can tell, there are none in the tournament.
Well, we have other ones, right? We have a swimming team and other ones, but it will be, right? So the question is, do we want to allow that or not? So because it will be more. So if we do not put this legislation, there will be more in a lot of different things. But do you believe we put girls at disadvantage?
I'm just saying this legislation's not needed. My high school classmate won the gold medal on the 100-meter hurdles in the 1984 Olympics.
But we'd have to define the
Nobody's
rules
trying
here.
to compete that I know of. You know,
Well, but it
I know
will
the one
be.
swimmer, but other than that.
It will be, and that's why we need to be clear. My time is expired.
Gentleman yields back. Yep. The gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And truly, I actually would like to play some video to say how we're going to enforce it. I want to see what it really can cause, how much harm, and we can show examples to have a much stronger guy playing the sports against biologically not as strong women. Most of us, and as I said, are not biologically as strong. And it is unfortunate that the other side tried to, really deter the conversation in a different direction and divert it, and not talking about, let's talk about how we are going to protect our women and girls. And I would appreciate if we can have video of some examples how our girls can actually get hurt. So I want us not to be enforcing, but preventing the situation like that where girls actually get hurt by males, biological males playing sports. I mean, it is really unbelievable for me that this is an issue that we cannot stand with women and girls on, because it is so hard. As I said, it makes us much tougher, maybe mentally, and a lot of us are for that reason. But let's just be honest. Boys, natural biological boys have more, have advantage, have a differently advantage against women playing sports. Let's recognize and be honest about that and not divert the conversation. So I would really appreciate us to go back to this bill and not to try to talk about issues like some of the other sides are trying to do, that we can debate and deliberate. And we will debate and deliberate. But this issue protected women. Yes, I will yield.
Yeah, can you ask the proponent of the bill how that solves what you're speaking of in a global sense, as opposed to dealing with the cases as they come? We could not understand any of the film that you saw. There was no names or no designation. I saw humanity, I saw girls enjoying sports, but I couldn't understand what it was. The proponent of the bill needs to say how this bill fixes anything that you've just spoken about.
Well, this is where you saw the examples where transgender boys, transgender girls in this case, are playing, transgender athletes were playing against naturally born girls on the same teams, on opposing teams, and girls got hurt. That was an example like that. If we're going to say that we are not going to have this situation, so we will not have, the disadvantage that you have as a female playing against much stronger athlete.
The proponent will not answer the question, how does that help what you're saying? And we couldn't make any sense out of the film.
Listen, well, I will. It's a slippery slope what we're doing, but I yield, Ms. Hagman.
So all of those were videos that I'm actually very surprised that
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of this bill, and I'll tell you something. It's really sad for me to see that the other side has said they also protect women and women's rights. It's really, not protected, these rights for women, and girls to be competitive in sports. And I'm talking as a woman who's been in very male-dominated professions all my life, whether it was farming, commercial real estate, large finances, and politics. It is extremely hard if you're a woman, independent thinker, and someone who is not a puppet to the establishment of your party to survive. Especially in politics where we have, a lot of men, that I would call, a lot of pricks with no balls but attack the women. And that's why I'm a big supporter of, of Second Amendment rights, which is the ultimate equalizer, because ultimately, let's just be honest, physically, we are not as strong as a man. When we have Second Amendment, it makes us equal. And that is why it is equality rights, Second Amendment, I truly believe. And for me, it's sad to see, I'm also a mother of 2 girls, that we are actually trying to put girls in disadvantage. And a lot of these girls work extremely, extremely hard to be able to succeed in the sport. It's very competitive, sometimes even, probably spend too much of their energy and don't even have time for academics. But truly, for me, it's very offensive to see that we have actually men who were, biological sex males now competing against these girls. Let's just be honest, whether we're playing golf or other things, we have for a reason. We have a different place where girls hit the ball, which is a reason for that. And it's sad for me to see that on this issue, we become politicized, and not protecting actually girls' abilities and celebrate successes and win. And now we even have biological male going into sports. Well, they're already tough on any other industry. It's good old boys clubs everywhere. And I hope the other side will start politicizing. There is no one here saying that we should be promoting any violence. No violence against anyone should be. People have their rights to do whatever they want, even craziest things, unless they want to hurt someone else. But this is actually can hurt women in the sports, and we have, accidents happen in that. It limits the ability for women and girls to win and succeed. And it also really undermines us as women, which we really should be promoting women, because it brings so much diversity, brings so much different opinions, and we as a mother should be part of all of these successes. So I think this is really disgraceful for me that we have attack on the women. We now have biologically born males, now in sports. So I strongly urge my colleagues to support this bill for all of the women that is very tough. If you really care about us mothers and women, I hope you will support it. And I hope people on the other side stop politicizing this issue, because this is really an issue of equality for women. And if we will talk about equality of rights and opportunities in these countries, this is actually the bill that brings opportunities for some of these girls that work extremely hard to succeed. And it's not easy to be a woman. I tell you, conservative woman is even harder, which makes us stronger. We have a lot of good, strong women, and I think we need to really cherish and support that, not to try to really attack with, with really politicizing and bad legislation that, the other side is trying to do. So I think it's truly protection of women's rights, and if you stand for women and women's rights, you should be in strong support of this bill. And I urge my colleagues to support it, and I strongly support this bill. And I thank you, my colleagues, for bringing it to this committee. And I think this is an issue that's very important, because we're the country of equal rights and equal opportunities. And I think, a lot of times we forget about that. And I think women bring so much to the table. And I would like to have more women be involved, and I want women to be able to succeed in sports, because it brings a lot of opportunities for them that otherwise they will not have. And, and these girls are working hard. And I thank everyone who will be supporting this bill, and we should really be watching who really standing for women or just does talking points and political appeasement on paper. Do you really stand for women and women's rights or not? And I thank you very much, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from, I think, Peter Strzok, going to get money from the American taxpayer.
Well, when that determination is made about whether settlement is made in that case, it will be announced.
You're back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, do you agree that yours and my job is to protect constitutional rights of Americans?
Yes, that's the easy one to agree with.
Okay, that's at least the green substance. So let's just go a little bit through the rights. And I want to explain to you how a lot of Americans in my district, and my observation or interested observation, do not trust and believe so. And this is an interesting observation I've noticed that, you know, a lot of people that then come with cases and they say FBI showed up to my house, ATF showed up to my house, never showed up before law-abiding citizens. When I ask them, were you in DC on January 6th? Strangely enough, a lot of these people usually say yes. And that is really looks very suspicious to me. But let's just talk about our amendments. Do you believe under the Second Amendment there should be, do you agree, no restriction on the quantity of gun that any law-abiding citizen should own? I'm not talking about types. I can own 5 guns, 500, or 5,000. Do you believe there should be no limitations on quantity of guns?
No limitations on what?
On the quantity, on number. 500 or 5,000 guns that I can own.
On the number of guns that people can purchase?
Yeah, for my collection.
I don't think there's any statutory.
Yeah, so there is no limitation. So you agree with that, right? So
I don't think there's
if I have as many guns as I want, you know, in my personal collection, do you think, you know, you have this new rule that you celebrated with your ATF director, which I think is very dangerous. Do you think there should be limitations on percentage of my collections that I should be able to sell, or time frame I can hold a gun? Like, you know, I could buy 10 guns and try to shoot them in the range, they're not good, and I went and sold them. Should be there any limitations on the time frame or percentage of how much of my collections I can replace?
There's an exception in the statute for sales from personal collections.
So I can do as many. I can sell 500 guns, so it shouldn't be a problem, right? If I want to, if it happens that it's, you know, I just want to replace.
All I can say is there's an exception in the statute and the regulations with respect to sales from personal collections. I don't know the answer to the question about percentages.
Well, it would be good because American people would like to know the answer, because this creates a lot of dangers, and we'll follow up with the latter because, you know, this is called destroy people's life, and we already had this situation that happened in Arkansas. But then another, on the First Amendment, do you think people had the right to be here on January 6th of 21? You know, if they didn't want to do anything bad, they just be here in Washington, D.C. Do you think it's a constitutional right for people to be here?
Yes, people have a constitutional right to be in Washington, D.C.
That's right. So you have, how many Americans did you charge at Section 1512C2, obstruction of justice, and convicted?
I don't know the answer, but it's listed on the web page.
Yeah, so it's several hundred, a lot of people. Why this section was legislated? Do you know when the Section 1512C2, what is the reason that the section was legislated?
It has to do with obstruction of a...
No, it didn't have to do. You should know legal history, right? When it was legislated and why.
Okay. You're asking me a question the Supreme Court's about to rule on.
So the history, this section was legislated for Sarbanes-Oxley with Enron situation to deal with a situation that happened on the financial crimes, right? And actually, the title is tampering with a witness, victim, and informant. Is that correct? You agree with that?
We can have a long discussion on the...
Not a discussion, it's just the fact, the historic fact, when it was broad and ambiguous, but that's what was legislated.
The text of the statute does not make the limitation you're saying. All of this has been argued in the
So,
Supreme Court.
it's argued. And if your interpretation is wrong on the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court is going to reverse this decision, do you have a plan? What are you going to do with all of these people that potentially wrongfully was charged? Do you have a plan?
Our plan is that we will follow the law that the Supreme Court tells us. We don't know yet what the Supreme Court will say. I can assure you we will follow what the Supreme Court says.
Well, but your ambiguous interpretation destroys people's life. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from... Oh, that's right. I apologize. Attorney General's asked for a brief break. We'll take a brief break. If we can make it 5 minutes, Mr. Attorney General, that'd be great.
Okay, great.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Ambassador Eisen was referring to the importance of a vibrant rule of law for democracy. We actually have constitutional republic, not pure democracy, to survive. But interestingly enough, when talking about intimidation, threatening, and disinformation, I would say, you know, I'm not an attorney. I'm actually a CPA and been involved with finances for a very long time. And I think a lot of Americans should be intimidated and worried if they pay bill to attorney and put it legal expense, and they can have 34 felony counts for that. That is true intimidation. That is a true what the law is, so that would make anyone very nervous, But, just talking about 2016, I think, Ambassador, you made statements about interference in election. What do you think, from your perspective, to have Department of Justice under President Obama at that time, and you're probably very familiar with this Durham report, rushing through closing the case for Hillary Clinton without doing any proper investigation, and then rushing through to have Russian collusion hoax against Trump without even vetting any of the information, and it turned out to be all lies, right? We have a report on that. So do you think, from your perspective, and then colluding to cover up with media like Politico and other one to cover up the story, isn't it seem like that could be looking like interference in election in 2016?
No, Ms. Spartz, I don't believe that. There was ample evidence to predicate that investigation, including the polling data that was passed from Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort to Konstantin Kilimnik.
No, I'm talking about the report. So you think the special prosecutor did not do a good job and he lied in the report? I mean, he actually concluded in his report that FBI didn't do its job, and it was outrageous. He was outraged what's happened in FBI.
He did
Well, it seems strange, but let's go further. The same situation with Hunter Biden in 2020. The same media, political reporters have the story that, that actually was 50 security, this national security firm advisors, a printed story that Hunter Biden laptop doesn't exist, and give legs to that story, and all media go that, and he's talking the debate, and this is all former, Department of Justice, employees. And then it's going to, in the election, President, Biden as a candidate at the time using it, to cover up and say, oh, it doesn't exist. We know it exists. Doesn't it look strange to you?
The Biden Department of Justice empowered a Trump holdover U.S. Attorney David Weiss to prosecute Hunter using the laptop. It's the exact opposite. It's an affirmation of the way the rule of law works.
In 2020, doesn't it look strange that that's a period during election and they have disinformation campaign? The same political reporters are doing again. Doesn't it seem like awfully strange to you? Doesn't it seem like, and it's not interference at all. But I'm not going to probably get an answer because you do have a double standard. And we do have a double standard. And our system of justice is broken. And that's why Americans are intimidated and they're worried about not existing of the rule of law, because we have a rule of law, that working, to protect now, the Department of Justice to protect people that they like. This is a political prosecution. And I'm not going to detail about the case, but it would be intimidated for Americans. And it would be very oppressive and tyrannical. And I couldn't believe, as an American who grew up in tyrannical country, that we would be sitting here and the system of media collusion with our justice system. I think that is very, very sad, and I'm very disappointed that you cannot tell the truth here. I yield back.
Would the gentlelady yield? The gentlelady yield?
I yield. I yield
appreciate
too.
Ms. Foley, Mr. Ivey basically said what you told the committee about the jury instructions. He disagreed with that strongly, but was going to let Mr. Eisen answer for you. So I want you to be able to answer for yourself.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the bait and switch that was going on here. The stuff that he talked about on the prosecutor's response was a response, and then he flipped the page and saw some of the detail. But that's all a response that talks about the first predicate, which makes the falsification of business records a felony offense. All of that information is about this first predicate. But the interesting thing is that all of that detail on the page that he flipped ended up having nothing to do with the first predicate, but the second predicate, which was the basis for the New York election law offense. So all of that detail was useless because all of that detail was about this and not this. In fact, we didn't even know this was necessary until the judge instructed the jury about this New York election law.
That's the point.
Right.
That's the point.
Failures of President Biden or President Zelensky or Jake Sullivan to deter Russia. Actually, we couldn't even post some of them, not just to get traction. It was kind of interesting. But So I'm sure that this is, very serious situation for a lot of people, and for freedom of speech, or freedom of opinion, and we're creating dictatorship of opinion, tyranny of opinion in our country. And I agree with Professor Waller, that's not a traditional collaboration of cartel. That's not a traditional cartel, too, because we actually have government coercing businesses and using mechanisms in businesses to restrain trade and take down competition. Very interesting. You actually, on the website of all of this organization, you talk it's first of its kind, cross-industry alliance. This is actually a flagship project of the World Economic Forum. We're creating public-private cooperation framework. We're actually creating this global risk, initiative and to control misinformation and disinformation, to shape the future of media, entertainment, and culture. And using organizations like SEC, FTC, PCAOB to take down competitors and businesses that don't agree with the dictatorship of opinion that we're creating. Actually, it's kind of interesting, I have to tell you, under Karl Marx and Hayek, communism, socialism, it's not redistribution of wealth. That's control of means of production, centralized power. And now we're centralizing power in Washington, D.C., by controlling means in production, maybe not in the form, but in the essence, by using financial system, by using UN climate agenda and CSG, which is very vague disclosure, by using global organization to coerce CEOs and businesses, to be able to intimidate, to sign on to something actually could be against the interest of their shareholders. This is very dangerous, what we have right now, creating the collusion of business and government. And what my question is, as an American congresswoman that have to protect American public interest and our investors, so I have a question for you, Mr. Shapiro. Don't you think, if these companies, actually sign on to these initiatives of global agenda initiatives, that could be actually, this unusual collaboration could be actually harmful to shareholders because they can exclude, I think your organization, Daily, actually, this is your organization, Mr. Jewell, put Daily Wire on a global high-risk exclusion list, categorized as conspiracy theory interest, and only conservative groups on that list. Kind of very, very interesting. But don't you think if we're going to include everyone who has a different views, like conservative views in our country, that's a risk that companies, publicly traded companies, should actually disclose. I think SEC need to tell them, so American investors know, do they want to invest in all of these global initiatives and know that their pension funds are investing in these initiatives? Don't you think that is transparency that American public deserves, and actually protect them, because they might make your country, board go company bankrupt because they now also colluded to take down boards using some illegal tools, but very interested in passive investment to become an active shareholder and against interests of the company. This is a pretty organized, very clever organized cartel. I agree. It never existed before. This is a very dangerous cartel to actually intimidate Americans and go after our First Amendment rights and freedom of speech and using money to do that. So I have, a little bit that minute remaining. So I would like Mr. Shapiro to tell me, what are your thoughts? I mean, do you think American people deserve at least transparency so they know where the money are going?
That is my main concern. I think the lack of transparency is extraordinary, and the question that I would have for some of my colleagues on the panel is, can they name a single conservative outlet or conservative-leaning host that they would deem to be brand safe on behalf of their advertisers? A single one, and if so, could they name them?
Yeah, maybe that's something, Mr. Jewell, do you know who's a good, because you excluded a lot of conservative media, your company. So which are not in your risk profile?
There are 600,000 sites in that exclusion list, and the vast majority of those are made up of illegal content, IP infringement, and we work very hard to make sure that we understand who those are and how we protect our brands from infringing on that.
Well, do you have high level, with a lot of traction, liberal groups on that list? Give me some examples. Or just because I only see conservative ones. So which ones? MSNBC actually part of his interest in NBC. It's part of your cartel. So that's a convenient way. You want them to be part of your cartel. So how does that work? To be not on the global exclusion.
The Time of the gentleman can respond. Time of the gentlelady is expired. The gentleman wishes to respond. I think the question was directed to Mr. Jewell.
The exclusion list is public. We have access to it. There are sites on both sides of it that are represented.
Time of the gentlelady is expired. The gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Ray. I think you have a little bit better tone in conversation, so I appreciate it, and answer some questions, so I appreciate it. Hopefully you'll answer also on 2 letters that I sent you over a year ago, one related to Durham report, and the other one related to Russian-infiltrated SBU that collaborated with FBI, so hopefully we'll get these answers, and hopefully we'll start doing authorization. Don't you think doing authorization would help us to get better answers? Congress should probably work in authorizing your agency. Don't you agree with that?
We work very hard to try to get information to this committee and to other committees.
But authorizing spending probably would be a good thing for us to do. Don't you agree?
Oh, I'm sorry, authorizing what?
Our spending, not just doing appropriating, but actually doing authorization of spending through this committee.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We might start doing that. But we can talk about, and a lot of my colleagues on the other side, AR-15 gets a lot of bad rap, like to bring it up, this issue. But really, there are a lot of hunting rifles that probably, maybe even more accurate than a lot of ARs. And don't you agree, we have like millions, right? Don't you agree, we have millions of rifles owned by law-abiding Americans. So do you think we should be taking them? Millions of rifles from law-abiding Americans? What do you think about that? Would that be something feasible, and really we should be doing that?
Well, again, I'm not going to be addressing anybody's specific legislative proposal. From our perspective, from the FBI's perspective, the concern is any dangerous weapon in the wrong hands.
But all weapons
in the
are
hands
dangerous.
of the wrong person.
But all weapons are dangerous, right?
I'm sorry?
All weapons are dangerous. Knives are dangerous,
Sure.
Explosive are dangerous. There are a lot of
weapons are by their very
but are we going to be
definition
confiscating, hunting rifles and rifles for millions of Americans? Do you think it's even feasible to do something like that from law-abiding citizens?
It's not something I'm advocating.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. So we have to go back. That was a catastrophic failure of security. That what's happened, recently with attempted assassination. Don't you agree with that?
Well, I think former Director Cheadle has already publicly acknowledged that it was, I think her words were, a significant operational failure.
Then we had, similar situation, a different, talking about bad optics. Speaker Pelosi at that time didn't want to have bad optics on January 6th, and we didn't have proper security here on January 6th. That was a catastrophic failure too. Are we looking at that? Any one conclusion was made from that? Have we made any adjustments? Because I know a lot of people, got hurt now just being here. With a lot of cases bringing up the Department of Justice, and a lot of them were really just law-abiding Americans that really just upset with the government, and they have a reason to do it. So I think we need to think about it before we prosecute, or instead of actually, looking how we can deal with real criminals and how we can have a proper security when we have events with so many people there. So did you have confidential human sources? I think you never answered that question on January 6th in the Capitol. Did you have some?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Confidential human sources. Did you have them on January 6th in the Capitol?
Well, again, I'm never going to be getting into when and where we
Okay,
have have not used confidential human sources. But
are you willing to stand the record that you had no confidential human sources that went into Capitol on January 6th?
as I've said consistently, I'm not going to get into where we have or have not used confidential human sources. I can tell you that if you are asking if the violence at the Capitol on January 6th was part of some operation orchestrated by FBI sources or agents, the answer is no.
No, I didn't ask you that. I asked, so did you investigate any confidential human sources? Did you do any investigation and looking at that? So you're not answering if you had any or not. So if you had potentially, did you do anything you needed to make sure to investigate that none of your sources did anything wrong? If they did wrong, they were prosecuted the same way, like you're trying to prosecute a lot of people that really, even in Supreme Court rule recently, that some unconstitutional charges.
Let me just add that there have now been, I think, 180 individuals who've gone to trial, in addition to the 850 who've pled guilty.
Right, but I think the problem is you put these charges, a lot of people would put guilty. But let me say just quickly, because I only have 10 seconds, really. So I hope you will take seriously what you're doing. You know, related to the border security is also a crisis. You know, your vice president was a lead-in on that. Has she initiated meetings with you to lead, like weekly or monthly meeting where she actually get briefings from you as a lead-in border czar that had that function? Have you had that? Has she initiated any meetings on a regular basis with you?
Again,
gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman can respond.
Right. On this issue of confidential human sources, number one, I will say there is a DOJ OIG review that's underway that I think addresses some of these kinds of topics, I believe, but I won't speak for the Inspector General. Second, as to this suggestion, which I've heard all too many times, that somehow January 6th was orchestrated by FBI agents or sources, I will note that in addition to my prior comments, that there have now been 850-ish individuals who've pled guilty, another 180 who've gone to trial. They've all had access to defense counsel, discovery, all the things the Constitution and the rules provide them. It's been in front of something like 15 different judges, I think dozens of juries, and not one has given credence to this notion. And in fact, I don't think any of them have even really seriously tried to raise it. So it's not just my word for it. Look what's happening in the cases. Thank you.
House, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Spartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like, Sheriff, I was looking a little bit at your bio. You're native of California and spent, almost 40 years as a sheriff. So you have a very long history and perspective, and how it changed California and what's really happened at the border. What do you believe from your perspective, you look at it historically and where we are right now, what things have worked? Obviously, we have no border security. We have completely broken immigration system where if you're here illegally, you get a lot of benefits and your judgment proof and a lot of welfare as it is very becoming problematic to really support our own citizens, but if you want to try to do something legal, it's almost impossible becoming to immigrate to our country with a long line and really very unreasonable and I would say very stupid immigration policy. But from the border security perspective, what have you seen work, what haven't worked? You work under a variety of administrations, Republicans, Democrats. What could you share with us that you think is important and where we are right now and what you think that an urgent needs that Congress needs to address?
Yes, and quite frankly, I don't feel that it's all that complicated. I feel that it's pretty reasonable, that we have a strong and secure border, that we're able to vet those who are coming and going, that we provide the opportunity for people to come into this country through the legal system in which we have had for years. There's laws in place that just need to be adhered to and obeyed. We find that the drug activity and transportation and trafficking of drugs, guns, human beings across the border is less. Will it completely eliminate it? No. That's just part of crime and criminal activity. But we will have a controllable handle on it if we enforce the laws that are currently in place, and that we get rid of the most egregious and felonious people causing harm to American citizens, holding them accountable. If you're bringing fentanyl into this country and people die, you need to be held accountable. If you're bringing human beings into this country and you are using them for a sex trade or gaining making money through criminal means by trafficking humans, you must be held accountable. I believe there should be federal laws that if you are trafficking young children for the purposes of sex trafficking or any other means, or any other human being for that matter, that there should be a federal law that you are held in federal prison for whatever determinate amount of time that is, so that a message is sent very clearly to those who are doing that. If you hold people accountable, if you enforce the laws that are in place, you will see a drastic reduction in the amount of people killed by fentanyl, the amount of cartels that are involved in coming across the border into our country, and you will actually have immigrants that are here, living peacefully, working in this country with the idea of chasing the American dream. I do not think it's complicated.
Thank you. I agree with you. And Unfortunately, we haven't seen it, and especially in the recent years. But if you would look at some things, what Congress is doing or doing, because really the most important power we have is power of the purse, right? We set up policies, we give direction, executive branch should, follow these directions, and funding is the way for us to, to actually hold the other branch accountable. And we haven't been doing our job very well, not just very well, it's terrible. I always say the only good thing that makes me optimistic that Congress has about 12% approval rating, so American people can see it. There is some hope. But from some of the things, what do you think are the most important things if we look at the fund? And maybe someday Congress will have a funding discussion. We haven't had it for a while. We just do CRs and presentations. What do you think, the most important things? Because we've heard some very tragic stories, the real consequences, real life affected, because of negligence and disregard of duty by executive branch. And what do you think things that Congress should maybe take a looking at the funding and other things that we try to force the other branch actually enforcing the laws?
I believe that law enforcement across this country should be supported, and the idea of defunding the police is one of the most ridiculous things that I've ever heard in my 38 years of law enforcement. We must support law enforcement at every level. Now, what that means is on the border, we need to spend money to make sure that we have a strong and secure border. But if you're asking me my opinion, and I'm only law enforcement, but common sense is something that I pride myself in. And I would argue that if infrastructure was put in place, that you had enough people along the border in regards to the judicial process, providing as many judges as you can, as well as possibly an incarceration facility to hold people in custody if they're coming across the border outside the means of the legal system. But you have enough resources at the border that you can actually keep it from becoming this funnel that everyone is so worried about and not being able to get into this country. But I think if you use the purse strings to help support resources along the border with infrastructure as well as people, I think that we would eliminate some of the issues that we, quite frankly, are facing in this country right now.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Sheriff